The first time I saw Cole Marin, I nearly dismissed my father's entire security council on the spot. I was standing in the war chamber of the Crystal Spire, surrounded by advisors who had just told me that my life was now in the hands of a human, and the human in question looked like someone who had wandered into the wrong building and was too polite to leave. I am Savara Quillith, third crown of the Aetheran Dominion. My civilization has ruled 12 star systems for 9,000 years. We bend gravity with our bare hands. Our warriors carry lances that can split the hull of a battleship from 100 meters away. Our skin carries bioluminescent patterns that shift with our moods, our emotions, our intentions, visible to anyone who knows how to read them. Our bones are reinforced with a mineral compound that makes them nearly impossible to break, and our reflexes operate at speeds that most galactic species cannot track with their eyes. We are, by any reasonable measure, among the most formidable species in the known galaxy. And yet, there he stood, my new bodyguard, a human. He was not tall, not by Aetheran standards, certainly. He stood perhaps 5 feet and 10 inches, which meant the top of his head barely reached the base of my jaw. His hair was dark and cut short, almost military in its plainness. His eyes were gray, calm, and utterly unremarkable. He wore a simple Terran compact duty uniform, dark fabric with no decorations, no rank insignia beyond a small patch on his shoulder that read TCS CPD in letters so small I had to look twice to read them. He carried a sidearm on his hip and a short blade on his belt. That was all. No gravitational gauntlets, no energy projector, no psionic dampening array, just a small firearm and a knife, as if he had come to fix a broken console rather than protect a princess. I looked at my father's chief advisor, Rendal, and let my bioluminescence shift to cold blue, the color of open contempt. "This is a joke," I said. Rendal did not smile. "This is the treaty, Your Highness. One Terran protection operative embedded in each royal household. The sovereign signed the accord himself." I knew why my father had done it, of course. It had nothing to do with trust building between our civilization and the Terran Compact. It was punishment. 3 weeks earlier, I had stood before the full Royal Council and publicly opposed my father's trade concessions to the Keldrith hegemony. I had called the proposed Vathara Accord a surrender, dressed in diplomatic language. I had said it in front of ambassadors, military commanders, and the entire broadcast network. The chamber had gone silent. My father had smiled through all of it, the slow, patient smile of a sovereign who was already deciding how to respond. And now here was his answer: a human bodyguard, a leash made of flesh and embarrassment. Cole Marin watched this entire exchange without moving. He did not react to my words. He did not shift his weight, or look away, or adjust his posture in any of the ways that indicate discomfort. He simply stood there, hands at his sides, eyes tracking the room the way a surveillance device tracks movement, passively, mechanically, as though he had been placed in a corner and switched on. "Sergeant Marin," Rendal said, "you have been briefed on your assignment?" "Yes, sir," Cole said. His voice was quiet, not weak, not hesitant, but deliberately low, as if he had trained himself to take up as little space as possible in a conversation. "Then you understand that your role is supplementary to the princess's existing security detail. You will defer to Guard Captain Vorath in all operational matters." "Understood." That was it. No questions, no introductions, no attempt to ingratiate himself or establish rapport. He simply acknowledged his position and fell silent, and the silence felt less like submission and more like patience. As if he were waiting for something none of us could see yet. I decided in that moment that I would make his assignment as miserable as possible. Over the next several days, I tested him. I did not do it subtly, and I did not care if he noticed. When I walked the palace corridors, I walked fast, faster than necessary, taking the steepest staircases and the narrowest passages. Aetheran architecture is built for our proportions, which means high ceilings, long strides, and steps that would reach a human's knees. Our corridors are wide enough for 2 Aetheran to walk abreast in full ceremonial armor, and the distances between chambers are vast. A single walk from my quarters to the council chamber covers nearly 2 kilometers. I expected Cole to struggle, to fall behind. to arrive at each destination panting and humiliated. He kept up, every time. He did not run, exactly. He moved with a kind of relentless efficiency, adjusting his stride, using handrails when needed, taking the stairs two at a time with a rhythm that suggested practice rather than desperation. He never complained, he never asked me to slow down, he never showed any sign that the pace was unusual. He simply appeared beside me wherever I stopped, slightly behind my right shoulder, breathing evenly, as if he had always been there. I changed my schedule without warning. Meetings moved forward by an hour. Dinners shifted to different wings of the palace. I told no one, not my attendants, not my security detail, expecting Cole to be caught off guard, to show up at the wrong location, to give me a reason to file a formal complaint about his competence. But each time I arrived at my new destination, Cole was already there, waiting, quiet, gray eyes scanning the room with that flat, methodical attention. I asked Vorath how this was possible. Vorath was my honor guard captain, a decorated veteran who stood 7 feet tall and could generate a localized gravity well, powerful enough to pin a ground vehicle to the floor. He had served in 3 planetary campaigns, held commendations from the sovereign himself, and commanded a personal detail of warriors whose combined service record spanned over 2 centuries. He was everything a royal protector should be: enormous, fearless, and absolutely loyal. The human checks your calendar system every 30 minutes, Vorath told me, his tone suggesting he found this mildly amusing. He also tracks the movement patterns of your staff. When your personal attendant changes direction, he follows within 90 seconds. I stared at Vorath. He is tracking my attendant? He is tracking everyone within a 2-corridor radius of your position, Your Highness. He has been doing so since his first day. He also appears to be memorizing the floor plan of every level you visit. I have seen him walking empty corridors during his off hours, counting steps and testing door locks. I did not know what to do with that information, so I ignored it. Instead, I asked Vorath to pull Cole's combat evaluation file from the Terran Compact's personnel database. I wanted numbers. I wanted proof that this human was exactly as useless as he appeared. Vorath accessed the file and read the classification aloud. Tier 2 Close Protection Specialist. In Aetheran military terms, Tier 2 is the rating we give to personnel who guard supply convoys and cargo transports. It is not a combat designation. It is barely a security designation. It is the rating that sits one level above unarmed administrative escort. I felt a grim satisfaction settle in my chest. My father had not just given me a human guard. He had given me the lowest-ranked human guard available. Perfect, I said. Absolutely perfect. 2 weeks into Cole's assignment, the Keldrith hegemony sent a formal diplomatic delegation to the Crystal Spire. The visit was part of the ongoing negotiations around the Vathara Accord, the trade agreement I had publicly opposed. The delegation was led by Ambassador Draven, a tall, thin Keldrith male with 4 eyes, arranged in a diamond pattern across his narrow face, and a voice like grinding metal. I despised him for reasons that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with the way he looked at me, as though I were a temporary obstacle he would soon have the pleasure of removing. The banquet was held in the Grand Reflection Hall, a vast chamber with mirrored walls, and a ceiling that displayed a real-time projection of the Vathara Nebula itself, all purple gas and burning stars. 300 guests attended: Aetheran nobility, Keldrith diplomats, military officers from 6 allied species, trade representatives, intelligence operatives pretending to be trade representatives, and one very quiet human standing 3 meters behind my chair. I was seated at the high table with Ambassador Draven on my left, and my cousin, Lord Revan, on my right. The conversation was tense and calculated. Draven probed for weaknesses in my political position, with questions that sounded casual, but carried edges sharp enough to draw blood. I deflected with practiced ease. Revan drank too much and said too little, which was his usual contribution to diplomacy. But during a pause in the conversation, I glanced back at Cole. He was not watching the guests. This struck me as odd, because watching the guests was literally the only thing a bodyguard was supposed to do at a banquet. 300 potential threats in one room, and Cole Marin was staring at the walls. No, not the walls. The service corridors. the narrow passages that connected the kitchen to the hall, the ventilation panels in the ceiling, the maintenance access points behind the decorative columns. He was mapping infrastructure, not people. His eyes moved in a systematic pattern, left to right, floor to ceiling, lingering on points of entry that no guest would ever use, but that someone with a different purpose might find very useful. As I watched, he leaned toward Vorath, who was stationed nearby, and spoke quietly. I could not hear the words, but I saw Vorath's expression shift from dismissal to mild irritation. Cole said something else. Vorath shook his head firmly and turned away. Cole did not press the matter. He simply returned to his position and continued watching the ceiling vents with the same unhurried, methodical attention. After the banquet, I asked Vorath what the human had wanted. He requested that I reposition 2 guards from the main entrance to the kitchen service corridor. Vorath said, his tone dripping with the particular brand of condescension that Aetheran warriors reserved for species they considered beneath them. I declined. The main entrance is the primary threat vector. Every security protocol prioritizes it. And what was his reasoning? He said the kitchen corridor had unmonitored access to the ventilation system and that 2 of the service staff had entered through a door that is normally badge-locked but was propped open with a wedge. He also noted that the ventilation panel above the 3rd service entrance had been accessed recently, based on scratches on the panel frame that were inconsistent with routine maintenance. I paused. Was he correct? Vorath hesitated. I did not verify. The next morning, I received a security briefing from Palace Intelligence. A minor breach had been detected overnight in the kitchen service corridor. Someone had accessed a ventilation panel and installed a passive listening device. The device was Keldrith in origin. It had been removed and was being analyzed. No damage had been done. No information had been compromised. It was, by all official assessments, a minor incident. But I sat in my quarters that evening and thought about Cole Marin, standing in the grand reflection hall, ignoring 300 guests, and staring at a propped-open door that no one else had noticed. I thought about Vorath refusing his request. I thought about the listening device that had been planted in the exact corridor Cole had flagged, through the exact ventilation panel he had identified. I told myself it was coincidence. Humans were lucky sometimes. That was all they had. I spent the next 3 weeks trying to forget about Cole Marin, which would have been considerably easier if he were not standing behind me for approximately 16 hours every day. The political situation was deteriorating rapidly. The Keldrith hegemony was pushing the Vathara Accord through back channels now, bypassing the formal council process entirely. Ambassador Draven had been meeting privately with several of my father's senior advisors, and the whispers in the palace corridors suggested that concessions were being made behind closed doors that would strip my family's mining rights in the Vathara Nebula and hand them to a Keldrith-controlled consortium. I had intercepted fragments of these negotiations through my own intelligence contacts, and every fragment confirmed my worst projections. This was not merely a trade dispute. The Vathara Nebula produced 70% of the refined gravitational ore that powered our military fleet. Losing control of those mines would make the Dominion dependent on Keldrith supply chains within a decade. It would end our sovereignty in everything but name. We would become a client state with a crown, a palace, and no real power. I was the loudest voice of opposition, and I knew that this made me dangerous to people who wanted the Accord to succeed. I had allies on the council, but not enough. I had public support, but public support does not stop a blade in the dark, and every day that passed brought the formal vote closer, a vote that would determine whether the Aetheran Dominion remained a sovereign power or began its slow descent into dependence. It was during this period that I began to notice things about Cole that I had previously dismissed as irrelevant. He never ate in my presence. At first, I assumed this was some kind of human dietary shyness, a species too self-conscious to consume food in front of others. But I eventually realized that he never ate during his shifts at all. He ate before he reported for duty and after he was relieved, and during the 16 hours in between, he consumed nothing but water from a small flask he carried on his belt. When I asked him about it, he said simply, "Full stomach, slow reaction time." He said it without drama or emphasis, as if he were stating a weather condition, a fact of biology, not a hardship. He never sat down, not once. Not during the long hours waiting outside council chambers, while I argued policy and debated trade projections with ministers who did not share my sense of urgency. Not during the tedious diplomatic receptions that stretched past midnight, where the conversations moved so slowly they seemed to be running backward. Not during the quiet evenings when I read in my study and there was nothing for him to do but stand in the outer chamber and wait. He stood, always, in a position that gave him a clear line of sight to the nearest exit and the nearest choke point simultaneously. I tested this after I noticed the pattern. I moved my reading sessions to different rooms, choosing chambers with unusual layouts, asymmetric doorways, oddly placed columns. Every time, Cole repositioned himself within minutes so that the same two conditions were met: exit and choke point. Always. He counted people. I saw his lips move faintly whenever we entered a room with more than a dozen occupants. He was performing a head count, updating it constantly, tracking arrivals and departures with a precision that my palace security system could barely match. He noticed when someone left a room who had not entered through the main door. He noticed when the number of service staff changed between courses at a dinner. He noticed everything, quietly, without drawing attention to the process. When I asked Vorath if his guards did the same, Vorath looked at me as if I had asked whether his warriors breathed water. "We assess threat levels, Your Highness. We do not count civilians. Cole counts everyone. The human has limited threat assessment capabilities. Counting heads is a compensatory behavior. It is what prey animals do." But I was beginning to wonder whether Vorath's assessment was accurate, because there was something else Cole did that none of my Aetheran guards had ever done. He watched me. Not with desire, not with curiosity, not with the nervous reverence that most people directed at a member of the royal family, that careful mix of respect and fear that keeps everyone at arm's length. Cole watched me the way a surgeon watches a patient on the operating table, with constant, clinical, absolute readiness. As if I were a problem he was perpetually solving in his mind, running scenarios, calculating trajectories, mapping distances between my body and every potential source of danger in the room. I could feel his attention on me like a physical weight, a quiet, unblinking focus that never wavered and never rested. It was, I admit, unsettling, and it was the first time I had ever felt genuinely protected rather than merely surrounded by guards. I did not tell anyone this. Instead, I engineered a situation designed to humiliate Cole and confirm my original assessment of his uselessness. My honor guard trained every morning in the palace combat ring, a circular arena with gravity-dampened floors and reinforced walls designed to absorb the impact of gravitational weapons at full power. I attended their sessions occasionally, more as a political gesture than a genuine interest. But one morning, with the political pressure mounting and my temper fraying at the edges, I brought Cole to the ring and suggested, with deliberate sweetness, that he might enjoy a sparring demonstration. "Against whom, Your Highness?" Cole asked. I looked at Vorath. Vorath was 7 feet and 2 inches of dense Aetheran muscle and bone, equipped with bio-gauntlets that could generate a gravity field strong enough to crush a ground transport into a flat sheet of metal. He had served in 3 planetary campaigns and had personally ended over 400 enemy combatants in close-quarters engagement. His service record was a catalog of decisive, overwhelming force. "Against your captain," I said. The other guards exchanged glances. 2 of them made sounds that, in Aetheran body language, were equivalent to stifled laughter. One of them, a young warrior named Kethis, actually turned away to compose himself. Cole looked at Vorath. He looked at the bio-gauntlets. He looked at the reinforced walls designed to absorb the impact of weapons that could shatter stone. He looked back at me. "With respect, Your Highness, I would prefer not to." "I am not asking for your preference, Sergeant." A silence stretched between us. Cole's expression did not change. He did not show fear, anger, or resentment. He simply processed the situation with that quiet, mechanical calm, and then nodded. "Unarmed only," he said. "No gauntlets." Vorath removed his bio-gauntlets with the air of someone removing jewelry before washing dishes. Without them, he was still 7 feet tall, still outweighed Cole by at least 150 pounds, and still possessed bones that were 3 times denser than anything in the human skeleton. The advantage was so grotesque that removing the gauntlets felt less like a concession and more like a confirmation that the outcome was predetermined. They faced each other in the ring. Vorath moved first, as Aetheran warriors always do. A straight-line advance, closing distance with explosive speed, reaching for Cole's shoulder with a grip that could dislocate a joint in a single twist. Cole was not there. He had moved sideways, not backward. A small, precise step that took him out of Vorath's reach by inches, not feet. Vorath adjusted, swinging wide with his right arm. Cole ducked under the arm and redirected his momentum forward, planting his shoulder against Vorath's hip and pushing. It was not a powerful push. It was a precisely angled push, targeting the fulcrum point of Vorath's center of gravity at the exact moment when his weight was shifting. Vorath stumbled. Not much. Just a half step. But for an Aetheran warrior, a half step of imbalance in a combat ring was a humiliation that would be discussed for weeks. Vorath spun, faster now, his bioluminescence shifting to the deep red of combat aggression. He seized Cole's arm. I heard the grip close, heard the pressure of Aetheran fingers on human bone, and I braced for the crack that would end this embarrassment. Cole rotated his wrist, not with strength, but with a specific, practiced twist that exploited the gap between Vorath's thumb and forefinger, the one anatomical weakness shared by nearly every bipedal species in the galaxy. His arm slipped free. In the same motion, he stepped behind Vorath's knee and applied downward pressure with his own knee against the joint. Vorath dropped to one knee. The ring went silent. Kethis stopped laughing. Vorath surged upward, catching Cole across the chest with a backhand that launched him off his feet. Cole hit the arena floor hard, rolled with the impact in a way that distributed the force across his entire body, and was standing again before Vorath had completed his turn. They faced each other for another 3 seconds, Cole breathing hard, Vorath barely winded. Then the timekeeper called the end of the round. 11 seconds. The entire exchange had lasted 11 seconds. Cole had not won. He had not come close to winning. Vorath was barely winded, and Cole was already developing a bruise across his entire left side that would take weeks to fade. In any objective assessment, the result was exactly what everyone had expected. But he had survived. For 11 seconds, a human being with no enhancements, no technology, no biological advantages of any kind, had engaged an Aetheran warrior in close combat and had not been broken. He had moved in ways I had never seen before, exploiting angles, joints, and momentum instead of force. He did not fight strength, he fought geometry. Vorath stared at Cole with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was not respect, not exactly. It was the expression of a predator that had just discovered its prey had teeth. Cole wiped blood from his lip, nodded to Vorath with a formality that bordered on courtesy, and returned to his position behind me without a word. I pretended I was not impressed, but my bioluminescence had shifted to pale silver, the color of involuntary surprise, and I knew that everyone in the ring had seen it. That evening, something happened that changed everything. I was in my private study, reviewing intelligence reports on the latest Keldrith diplomatic maneuvers, when a message arrived, through an encrypted channel I had not used in months. It was from a contact inside the Keldrith diplomatic mission, a low-ranking analyst named Dyrith, who owed me a favor from a previous trade negotiation, where I had intervened to prevent his dismissal. The message was short. Contract issued. Target. Third Crown. Execution window. Before the council vote. 12 assets deployed. Void rank. I read the message 3 times. Then I read it again. Void rank was the Keldrith hegemony's highest assassination caste. They were not soldiers. They were specialists, trained from childhood in infiltration, poison, and silent elimination. A single void rank operative could dismantle a security detail of 20 guards without triggering an alarm. They moved through fortified structures like water through sand, finding every crack, every gap, every overlooked vulnerability. The message said 12 had been deployed. 12 to eliminate 1 princess. I summoned Vorath immediately and showed him the message. His bioluminescence went dark, the Aetheran equivalent of a human losing all color in their face. I will triple the guard rotation, he said. I will request orbital surveillance from the fleet. I will activate every perimeter protocol we have. Do it, I said. Do everything. Vorath turned to leave. Cole was standing near the door, as always. He had not moved during our conversation. He had not reacted visibly to the message. He simply waited until Vorath had left the room, and then he looked at me and asked a single question. Who benefits most if you die before the vote? I opened my mouth to dismiss the question. Then I closed it. Because the answer was not Ambassador Draven. Draven wanted the accord, but he did not need me dead to achieve it. He had political tools, diplomatic leverage, back-channel negotiations. The answer was someone else, someone inside the Dominion, someone whose political position would improve if my voice was permanently silenced, someone who had access to the kind of back-channels that could connect a Keldrith assassination contract to a domestic political agenda. I did not answer Cole's question, but the question lodged in my mind like a blade that I could not extract, and every time I turned it over, it cut a little deeper. That night, lying in my quarters in the dark, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the faint sound of Cole's boots on the floor of the outer chamber. He was pacing, not nervously, methodically, walking the perimeter of the room, testing the locks, checking the ventilation panels, counting the seconds between guard rotations outside the door. I was beginning to suspect that the humans saw things the rest of us were trained to overlook, because we had never needed to be prey. The night before the council vote on the Vathara Accord, the crystal spire hummed with a tension I could feel in my teeth. Every corridor seemed to vibrate with it. Every conversation seemed weighted by it. And the twin suns had set 3 hours ago, leaving the capital city dark and watchful beneath a sky full of unfamiliar stars. I was in my private quarters on the 40th level, reviewing the speech I would deliver the following morning. Every word had been chosen for maximum political impact. Every argument had been constructed to dismantle the accord line by line, to expose its hidden dependencies, to lay bare the slow surrender it represented. If I delivered it well, I could shift enough votes to defeat the proposal. If I failed, the Vathara Nebula and everything it represented would belong to the Keldrith hegemony within 5 years. Vorath had done everything I asked. 8 honor guards were stationed on my floor, each armed with gravitational lances and bio-gauntlets, capable of collapsing a doorway on itself. Perimeter drones circled the exterior of the tower in overlapping patterns, scanning for thermal signatures and electromagnetic anomalies. Sensor grids covered every corridor, every service passage, every ventilation shaft within 3 levels of my position. The crystal spire had never been more heavily defended, and the weight of that defense should have made me feel safe. It did not. Cole Marin sat in the outer chamber, as he always did. He had a data pad in his hands, and he was reviewing something. I had stopped asking what he was reviewing weeks ago. The answer was always the same. Floor plans, personnel schedules, access logs. The architecture of my survival, studied and restudied, and committed to a memory that apparently never stopped working. I had not spoken to him about the assassination warning since the night I received it. I had not spoken to him about much of anything. But I had noticed that in the 3 weeks since the warning, Cole had changed. Not in any visible way. He still stood in the same position, still wore the same uniform, still carried the same sidearm and blade. But the quality of his attention had shifted. It was tighter now, more compressed, like a spring that had been wound one turn past its natural limit, still holding, still stable, but vibrating with a potential energy that could be felt by anyone standing close enough. At 2200 hours, I set down my speech notes and walked to the doorway of the outer chamber. Cole was on his feet before I reached the threshold. He always was. "You should sleep, Sergeant," I said. "After you do, Your Highness." "That is not how guard rotations work." "No, Your Highness." He did not elaborate. He did not need to. We both understood that he had no intention of sleeping that night. I returned to my quarters and tried to focus on the speech. The words blurred on the screen. I read the same paragraph 3 times, without absorbing a single word. At 23:47, the silence changed. I did not hear an alarm. That was the first sign that something was catastrophically wrong. The Crystal Spire's sensor grid was designed to produce a graduated alert system, from soft chimes for minor anomalies to full-spectrum sirens for active breaches. What I heard was nothing, not the absence of threat, but the absence of the system itself. The ambient hum of the sensor network, a sound so constant and so pervasive that I had stopped noticing it years ago, simply ceased. It was like going deaf in one ear, a subtraction so sudden that the world felt tilted, as though the floor had shifted beneath my feet. I stood up from my desk. Before I could take a step toward the door, it opened. Cole was there. His sidearm was already in his hand, held low against his thigh in a grip that looked practiced to the point of automation, an extension of his arm rather than a separate object. His gray eyes met mine, and in them I saw something I had never seen before. Not fear, calculation. The rapid, focused processing of a mind that was running through scenarios faster than language could follow, discarding options, selecting paths, compressing minutes of tactical analysis into fractions of a second. Your Highness. Room 2, now. Room 2 was my safe room, a reinforced chamber built into the interior of my quarters, with walls dense enough to stop a gravitational lance at point-blank range. It had its own air supply, its own communication array, and a blast door that could withstand a directed orbital strike. It had been designed to keep me alive through the worst scenarios my security advisors could imagine. What is happening? I demanded. Signal null field. Military grade. The sensor grid is down across the entire floor. Your guards are operating blind. How do you know it is a signal null field? Cole held up a small device I had never seen before. It was barely larger than a coin, strapped to the inside of his wrist beneath his sleeve. Passive Terran scanner. It detected the null signature 4 seconds before the grid went down. 4 seconds. He had known before anyone else. Before Vorath, before the guard detail, before the palace intelligence system that had cost more to build than most planetary defense networks. 4 seconds of warning, and he had used every one of them to reach my door. Room 2, he repeated. Now. I moved. Not because I was afraid, although fear was building in my chest like a cold tide rising from my stomach to my throat. I moved because something in Cole's voice, quiet and flat and absolutely certain, told me that arguing would cost time I did not have. I entered the safe room. Cole followed me to the door, checked the interior with a single sweep of his eyes, checked the ventilation panel in the ceiling, checked the emergency communication terminal mounted on the far wall. Then he looked at me. Lock it behind me. Do not open it for anyone. Not for Vorath, not for your guards, not for anyone whose voice you recognize. I will use the code word Cardinal when it is safe. Where are you going? To do my job. He closed the door. I engaged the blast lock. The heavy mechanism sealed with a sound like a vault closing, layered bolts driving into reinforced slots, and I was alone. The safe room was small, windowless, lit by a single recessed panel in the ceiling. The walls were so thick that sound barely penetrated them. I pressed my palms flat against the blast door and tried to hear what was happening on the other side. For 10 seconds, there was silence. Then I heard the first shot. It was not the deep resonance of a gravitational lance. It was sharp and compact, the sound of Cole's sidearm discharging in a confined space. 1 shot, 2 shots, then a sound I could not identify, something between a crack and a snap, organic and final. The sound of something breaking that was not furniture. Then running, not toward me. Away from the safe room, deeper into the outer quarters. I pressed my ear against the blast door. The material was too dense to transmit sound clearly, but I could feel vibrations through the metal, transmitted through the structure of the building itself. Impacts. Something heavy hitting a wall with enough force to crack the decorative paneling. The muffled percussion of Cole's sidearm firing in controlled bursts. 2 rounds. A pause. 2 more rounds. Then a longer pause that stretched for several seconds, during which I heard nothing but my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Then a sound that turned my blood cold. A Keldrith phase blade activating. I had heard that sound before, in combat training simulations, designed to prepare us for engagement with hegemony forces. A phase blade did not cut. It disintegrated molecular bonds along its edge, separating matter at the atomic level. It could pass through Aetherian body armor, like smoke through a net, through reinforced steel, like a finger through water. The sound it made when it powered up was a high, thin whine, like a crystal goblet being struck with a metal rod and held at the moment of resonance. I heard it activate 3 separate times. 3 blades. 3 assassins still moving, still fighting, still trying to reach me. Between each activation, I heard Cole. Not words, sounds, the thud of a body being redirected against a wall, the crash of furniture breaking apart, wood splintering, metal bending, the short, clipped report of his sidearm, and something else, something that took me a moment to identify because it was so controlled, so deliberate, that it sounded almost mechanical. Breathing. His breathing. Fast, controlled, rhythmic. Not the ragged gasping of panic, but the disciplined intake of someone managing their oxygen like a resource, spending it carefully, refusing to waste a single breath on fear or pain, or the overwhelming reality of what was happening around him. The sounds moved. They traveled down the corridor outside my quarters, then back, then into the adjacent room. I heard glass shatter, a decorative panel exploding outward from an impact. I heard something metallic hit the floor and skid across stone with a scraping sound that echoed through the blast door. I heard a grunt, low and tight, that might have been pain forced through clenched teeth. Then 3 shots in rapid succession, so close together they almost sounded like one. Then silence. The silence lasted approximately 10 seconds. I counted them. Each one felt like a year, a vast empty space in which anything could have happened, in which Cole could have died without me knowing, in which the next sound I heard could be a phase blade cutting through the blast door. Then more movement. Lighter now. Faster. The sound of someone running, not away, but towards something, closing distance with purpose. 2 more shots. A thud. Another crack. The same organic finality as before. Then nothing. I waited. My hands were pressed flat against the blast door so hard that my fingers ached. My bioluminescence had gone completely dark, which happens to Aetherian when we experience extreme stress, when the body diverts all energy from display to survival. I was breathing too fast. I forced myself to slow down. I listened. Footsteps, slow, measured, approaching the safe room door, each one deliberate, as if the person making them was concentrating on remaining upright. I held my breath. Cardinal. 1 word. Cole's voice, rough, strained, but unmistakable. I disengaged the blast lock. The door swung open. The corridor beyond looked like a detonation had occurred. The decorative panels that lined the walls were shattered, fragments of carved crystal scattered across the floor like broken ice. 2 of the ceiling light fixtures had been torn from their mounts and lay in pieces, their wiring exposed. A heavy wooden table that had stood in the outer chamber, a beautiful piece of Aetherian craftsmanship that had been in the palace for 300 years, was broken into 3 pieces, and one of those pieces had blood on its edge. Not Aetherian blood. Darker. Cole stood in the center of the corridor. He was breathing hard, each breath visibly costing him effort, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that was no longer controlled. His left arm hung at an angle that was not natural, bent slightly outward at the forearm in a way that told me something inside it was broken. A dark stain was spreading across his ribs on the right side, soaking through his uniform in a slow bloom. A burn mark on his left shoulder, where a phase blade had passed close enough to sear through fabric and skin, glistened with the wet sheen of exposed tissue beneath. His sidearm was in his right hand, held loosely, the slide locked back on an empty magazine. Behind him, on the floor of the corridor, in the rooms adjacent to my quarters, and scattered across the length of the 40th floor, lay 12 bodies. 12 Keldrith assassins. Void rank. The highest caste of their civilization's most lethal operatives. They were dressed in matte black infiltration suits, designed to absorb light and sensor radiation simultaneously. Each carried a phase blade and a biotoxin injector loaded with a compound that could stop an Aetherian heart in 3 seconds. They had entered through the service infrastructure, using the signal null field to blind the sensor grid and the guard detail simultaneously. They had moved in coordinated pairs, covering each other with the precision of a species that had perfected the art of silent elimination over 1,000 years of practice. They had overwhelmed Vorath and 6 of my honor guards in the first 30 seconds. Vorath had been struck by a biotoxin injector before he could activate his gauntlets. He was gone before he hit the floor. The 6 guards who had engaged the assassins directly had lasted slightly longer, but against void-rank operatives armed with phase blades in a sensor-dark environment, their gravitational lances were too slow, too heavy, too designed for open warfare rather than close-quarters ambush. The remaining 2 guards had been disabled, struck with neural disruptors that left them alive but paralyzed. That left Cole. I later learned the details, pieced together from partial security footage, from the positions of the bodies, from the testimony of the 2 surviving guards who had been conscious enough to hear what happened, even though they could not move. Cole had walked this floor 312 times since his assignment began. He had memorized every door's swing radius, every blind corner, every piece of furniture heavy enough to provide cover and light enough to be moved or thrown. He knew the exact distance between the outer chamber and the nearest choke point. He knew which walls were load-bearing and which were decorative partitions that could be broken through. He knew the ceiling height in every section and whether there was space above the light fixtures for a body to hide. When the signal null field activated, he had not waited for confirmation of a threat. He had not paused to assess the situation or consult a protocol. He had moved immediately, clearing me to the safe room in 11 seconds, and then turning to face the corridor with nothing but a sidearm, a short blade, and 312 walks worth of architectural knowledge. The first 2 assassins came from the northern service access. Cole engaged them in the doorway, a space narrow enough that their numerical advantage was neutralized and only one could approach at a time. He used his sidearm at close range, firing twice into the first assassin's center mass before the Keldrith could activate his phase blade. The second assassin lunged with a toxin injector. Cole sidestepped, caught the Keldrith's wrist, and used the assassin's own forward momentum to drive him into the doorframe. The injector discharged harmlessly into the wall. The next 4 came in 2 pairs, 30 seconds apart, from opposite ends of the corridor. This was where Cole's knowledge of the floor plan became decisive. He retreated into the outer chamber, overturned the heavy wooden table to create a barrier, and used it to funnel the first pair into a single-file approach. He fired through the table's surface, which was thick enough to stop a phase blade, but not a ballistic round traveling at 900 meters per second. 2 shots, 2 impacts. The first assassin fell. The second vaulted the table and activated her phase blade with the high whine I had heard through the blast door. Cole abandoned his position, rolled under the blade's arc, and drove his short blade into the gap between the assassin's helmet and chest plate, the only unarmored point on a void-rank infiltration suit. The second pair found him in the adjacent room, a small sitting chamber with a chandelier and 2 decorative columns. Cole used the columns as cover, circling them in a pattern that forced the assassins to separate or risk hitting each other. He engaged the first with his remaining sidearm rounds, then engaged the second with a broken piece of the table he had carried with him, because humans, apparently, never stop finding ways to turn their environment into a weapon. 4 remained. They came together, all at once, a coordinated rush designed to overwhelm a single defender through sheer volume. 4 void-rank assassins moving in synchronized formation, 3 with phase blades and 1 with a neural disruptor, against a single wounded human with an empty sidearm and a broken table leg. He defeated them in 43 seconds. I do not know exactly how. The surviving footage is fragmented, and the angles are poor. What I know is that he did not stand his ground and fight. He moved, constantly, relentlessly, refusing to occupy any position for more than 2 seconds. He used the architecture of the corridor like a weapon, driving assassins into walls, into each other, into the debris of his earlier engagements. He fought with his blade, with his hands, with pieces of broken furniture, with a fire suppression canister he tore from the wall and used as both a blunt instrument and a visual obstruction when he discharged its contents into the corridor. He fought the way a river fights a dam, not with force, but with the absolute refusal to stop flowing, finding every gap, exploiting every opening, never stopping, never slowing, never accepting that the situation was impossible. When it was over, 12 Keldrith assassins were on the ground. and Cole Marin stood in the middle of the corridor with a fractured arm, 3 cracked ribs, a gash across his side that ran from his hip to his lower chest, and a phase blade burn on his shoulder that had nearly reached bone. He looked at me. He was swaying slightly, but his feet were planted. "You are safe, Your Highness. We should relocate." I stood in the doorway of my safe room and looked at this man. This small, quiet, unassuming human who carried a sidearm and a knife, and who I had classified as a luggage escort. This Tier 2 close protection specialist, who had just single-handedly dismantled a full void-rank assassination squad in under 5 minutes, using furniture and geometry, and the pure, relentless refusal to stop moving. I had called him useless. I had tried to humiliate him. I had changed my schedule to inconvenience him, walked too fast to exhaust him, forced him into a sparring match to embarrass him. And he had said nothing. He had simply waited for the moment when being useful was the difference between my life and my death, and then he had been the most dangerous thing in the building. My bioluminescence flickered. Not cold blue this time, not pale silver, a color I had not produced since I was a child, when my mother held me after a night terror and whispered that the dark could not reach me. Warm gold, the color of gratitude, so deep it borders on something I did not have a word for. "Thank you," I said. Cole nodded. Just once. Then his knees buckled, and I caught him before he hit the floor. The crystal spire erupted into chaos before dawn. Emergency alerts cascaded through every level of the palace as security teams discovered the carnage on the 40th floor. Medical units, intelligence officers, and armed response teams flooded the corridors in overlapping waves of organized panic. My father, the Sovereign, was woken by his chief of staff and briefed within minutes. Orders were issued, perimeters were established, and the Keldrith diplomatic mission issued an immediate statement denying all knowledge of the attack, which no one believed and everyone accepted, because that is how diplomacy works when both sides are still pretending civility matters. Vorath was dead. 6 of my honor guards were dead. 2 were recovering from neural disruptor exposure in the medical wing, conscious but unable to move, and Cole Marin, the human who had saved my life by refusing to fall in a corridor full of the most dangerous operatives in the galaxy, was lying on a medical table while Aetherin physicians tried to figure out how to treat a species they had never operated on before. I went to the medical wing against protocol. My surviving security detail, hastily reassembled from off-duty personnel who had been pulled from sleep and briefed on what had happened, urged me to remain in a secured location. They cited regulations. They cited risk assessments. They cited the possibility that additional threats remained active. I told them where I was going and walked out of the room before they could object. Protocol had not saved me. Protocol had put 8 elite Aetherin warriors on my floor, warriors with gravitational lances and bio-gauntlets and centuries of combined experience, and the man who actually kept me alive had been classified as a luggage escort carrying a sidearm and a knife. The medical wing was a long, bright corridor lined with treatment alcoves, each one equipped with diagnostic arrays calibrated for Aetherin physiology. Cole was in the 3rd alcove, sitting upright on a diagnostic table that was designed for patients a foot taller than him, his legs dangling off the edge like a child on a high chair. The contrast would have been comical if not for the injuries. The Aetherin medical team had cataloged everything with the meticulous precision that our physicians are trained for. A fractured radius in his left forearm, which explained the unnatural angle I had seen in the corridor. 3 cracked ribs on his right side, likely caused by a direct impact from an assassin's elbow or knee during one of the close-quarters engagements. A deep laceration across his oblique muscles, running from his hip to his lower chest, which had been caused by a phase blade that had passed close enough to part flesh, but not close enough to sever the underlying muscle wall. And the burn on his left shoulder, where a second phase blade had made direct contact for approximately 1.4 seconds, long enough to destroy skin and the tissue beneath it, down to within millimeters of bone. The physicians were confused, not by the injuries themselves, which were straightforward enough to catalog, but by the fact that Cole was conscious. By Aetherin physiological standards, the combined trauma load should have induced involuntary shutdown, a survival mechanism our nervous systems trigger when damage exceeds a certain threshold. Our bodies protect themselves by forcing unconsciousness, slowing metabolic processes, conserving energy for healing. Humans, apparently, do not have this mechanism. Humans remain conscious through injuries that would put an Aetherin into a protective coma. They feel everything, process everything, and keep functioning until their bodies physically cannot continue. When I entered the alcove, Cole tried to stand. "Sit," I said. He sat. It was the first order he had ever obeyed without hesitation, and I understood that it was because his body was too damaged to argue, rather than because he had suddenly discovered deference. Even now, even with bones held together by temporary splints and blood soaking through fresh bandages, the obedience was a concession to physics rather than rank. "Your Highness should not be here," he said. "My guard captain and 6 of my warriors are dead. 2 more are incapacitated. You are the only member of my security detail currently functional, and I use that word loosely." I looked at his bandaged arm, his wrapped ribs, the gel pack the physicians had applied to his shoulder burn. "I will be wherever I decide to be." He accepted this without argument. He was holding a data pad in his uninjured hand, studying a schematic of the service corridors through which the assassins had entered. Even now, with his body held together by medical adhesive and sheer stubbornness, he was working. Reviewing the breach points, identifying the weaknesses that had been exploited, preparing for the possibility that more might come. I sat down on the edge of the adjacent diagnostic table. We were alone. The physicians had stepped out at my gesture, assuming I wanted to deliver some kind of formal commendation or royal acknowledgement. I did not. I wanted an answer to a question that had been forming in my mind since the moment I opened the safe room door and saw 12 bodies on the floor. "How?" I asked. Cole looked up from the datapad. "Your Highness?" "Not how you fought them. I have reviewed the footage. I know the mechanics, the sequence, the tactics. I am asking you a different question." I paused, searching for the right words in a language that suddenly felt inadequate. "You knew what was in that corridor. 12 void-rank assassins. You had 4 seconds of warning, which is 4 seconds more than anyone else had. You could have entered the safe room with me. The blast door would have held. Reinforcements would have arrived within minutes. You could have waited." "Yes, Your Highness." "So why did you not?" He set the datapad down on the table beside him. For the first time since I had met him, he seemed to be choosing his words carefully, not because he was uncertain, but because the answer mattered to him in a way that went beyond professional obligation. "The safe room is designed to withstand a direct assault," he said, "but the blast door has a seal cycle of 6 seconds. If 2 assassins reached the door before the seal completed, they could have wedged it. The toxin injectors have a 3-meter dispersal range. You would have been trapped in an enclosed space with aerosolized poison and no way to vent it." "So it was tactical." "Partly." He met my eyes. Those gray eyes, calm even now, steady even now. "Partly. It is just the job. I am here, so you do not have to be in that room alone, wondering if the door will hold." The simplicity of it stunned me. Not the logic, which was sound, but the underlying assumption. He had not weighed his life against mine and made a calculated decision. He had not performed a risk assessment and concluded that his survival was less strategically important. He had simply decided, at some point before the attack ever happened, perhaps on his very first day, that when the moment came, he would be between me and whatever was trying to reach me. That was the job. That was all the reasoning he needed. Everything else, the tactics, the training, the 312 walks through my floor, was just preparation for a decision he had already made. I pressed further, because I am Aetherin, and we do not leave questions half-answered. "Tell me about humans." "What about humans, Your Highness?" "You fight the way no species I have encountered fights. Not with power, not with technology, not with overwhelming force. You fight as if the concept of losing is something you acknowledge intellectually, but refuse to accept physically. Where does that come from?" Cole was quiet for a moment. His breathing had steadied, and the pain in his expression had settled into something manageable, a background condition, rather than a crisis. Then he said something that would change the way I understood his entire species. "We evolved as persistence predators." I waited. On Earth, in the early period of our species, we were not the fastest animals. We were not the strongest. We had no claws, no venom, no armor plating, no natural weapons of any significance. What we had was endurance. We could run, not fast, but far. Farther than anything else on our planet. We would identify prey and then follow it, for hours, for days sometimes. The animal would sprint away from us, fast and powerful, and we would follow at a steady pace. It would sprint again, and we would follow again. It would stop to rest, and we would close the distance. Eventually, after hours of running, the animal's body would overheat. It would collapse from exhaustion, and we would walk up to it, still breathing, still moving, still going, and it would be over. He looked at me with those gray eyes. We do not win the first second. We win the last one. I sat with that for a long time. The medical wing hummed around us, and somewhere in the palace, security teams were still clearing the 40th floor, still cataloging evidence, still trying to understand what had happened. But in that small alcove, I felt the galaxy shift slightly on its axis. A species that had conquered its world, not through dominance, but through the sheer, grinding refusal to stop pursuing. A species whose greatest evolutionary advantage was not strength or speed or intelligence, but the biological inability to accept that the chase was over. I thought about Cole in that corridor, facing 12 of the most dangerous operatives in the galaxy, and I understood something I had missed entirely. He had not fought them because he believed he could win. He had fought them because stopping was not something his biology permitted. Humans do not surrender. They do not shut down. They endure, and endure, and endure, until either they succeed or their bodies physically cease to function. There is no middle ground. There is no retreat threshold. There is only forward and forward and forward, until the thing in front of them stops moving or they do. It was, I realized, the most terrifying thing I had ever heard. The political aftermath consumed the next several days with an intensity that left no room for rest or reflection. I leveraged the assassination attempt with a precision that surprised even my own advisors, who had underestimated both my capacity for strategic anger and my willingness to use a crisis as a weapon. The evidence was undeniable. Keldrith military-grade signal null technology recovered from the 40th floor. Void rank operatives carrying Keldrith-manufactured phase blades with serial numbers that traced back to hegemony armories. Biotoxin compounds that were only produced in 2 facilities in Keldrith-controlled space, both under direct government oversight, with inventory controls that made unauthorized distribution effectively impossible. Ambassador Dravan could deny involvement until his 4 eyes fell out, but the physical evidence told a story that no diplomatic language could obscure. I needed Cole's testimony, a formal statement from the operative who had survived the attack, detailing the equipment used, the tactics employed, and the origin signatures of the weapons recovered from the scene. Cole's account would carry particular weight because he was neither a Theran nor Keldrith. He was a neutral party, a Terran compact officer with no political stake in the Vathara dispute, no family connections to Dominion power structures, no reason to fabricate or exaggerate. His testimony could not be dismissed as partisan. I explained this to Cole in the medical wing. I told him plainly that testifying before the Royal Council would make him a named participant in a political conflict between 2 civilizations that had been adversaries for centuries. It would place his name in Keldrith intelligence files. It would make him a target for retaliation, not just on Aetheran soil, but anywhere in the galaxy he might be stationed for the rest of his career. He listened to all of it without interruption. Then he said, "When do you need me there?" "You understand what I am asking. This is not part of your assignment. The Terran Compact did not send you here to testify in our political disputes. Agreeing to this would put you at personal risk, far beyond what your government contracted you for. You are asking me to do it." "Yes." "Then I will do it." I stared at him. "That is your entire reasoning?" I asked. "Therefore you will?" "You are my principal, Your Highness. You asked me to do something that serves your safety and your political position. That is sufficient." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him that following a request without weighing the personal cost was not courage, it was recklessness. But looking at him, I realized that was not what this was. He was not blindly obeying me. He was choosing to help me, and he was using my request as the permission he needed to make that choice. Humans, I was learning, do not need reasons to be brave. They need permission to care. They need someone to look at them and say, "This matters," and then they will walk into fire, because the asking was enough. I left the medical wing and returned to my quarters to prepare for the council vote. But I carried Cole's words with me, and they settled into the structure of my thinking, like load-bearing walls in a building I was only beginning to understand. I had spent my life surrounded by warriors who fought for glory, for rank, for dominion. I had never met someone who fought simply because the person behind him needed to survive. The morning of the council vote was clear and cold, with the light of our system's twin suns cutting through the upper atmosphere of the capital world like blades of pale gold. I had not slept. I had spent the hours between midnight and dawn refining my speech, sharpening every argument, testing every phrase against the counter-arguments I knew Ambassador Draven would deploy. By the time the first sun crested the eastern mountains, I was ready. The Royal Council Chamber was a vast amphitheater carved from a single piece of gravitational crystal, the same mineral that powered our fleet and sustained our civilization. 300 seats, arranged in a descending spiral around a central platform where the speaker stood, elevated above the chamber floor so that every face in every seat was visible and every word carried without amplification. Every seat was occupied. Aetheran nobles in formal court attire, military commanders in dress uniforms bearing campaign medals from conflicts that spanned decades, provincial governors whose territories covered entire continents, trade ministers, intelligence directors, and senior administrators whose decisions shaped the daily lives of billions. The density of political power in that room pressed against my skin like heat from a furnace. The Keldrith delegation was seated in the diplomatic gallery above the main floor, separated from the council by a transparent barrier that was decorative rather than functional. Ambassador Draven sat at the center of his entourage, his 4 eyes fixed on me with the patient focus of someone who believed the outcome was already determined. He had spent 3 weeks in private meetings with my father's advisors. He believed his concessions were locked, his votes were secured, and that my opposition was a formality that would be recorded and then overridden by the weight of political pragmatism. He believed the Vathara Accord would pass. He had not yet seen what I had prepared. I stood on the central platform in formal Aetheran court attire, white crystalline fabric with bioluminescent threading that shifted color with my emotional state. The fabric was ancient, passed down through 7 generations of Quillith women, and it carried the accumulated resonance of every speech that had been delivered while wearing it. I felt that weight. I welcomed it. Behind me, positioned exactly 3 meters to my right and 1 meter back, stood Cole Marin. He was not wearing Aetheran ceremonial armor. He was not dressed in borrowed finery or diplomatic costume, or any of the elaborate disguises that protocol officers sometimes use to make foreign personnel blend into formal Aetheran settings. He wore his Terran compact duty uniform, the same plain dark fabric he had worn every day since his arrival. It was clean, but worn, patched at the left elbow, where repeated use had thinned the material. His sidearm was on his hip. His short blade was on his belt. The bandage on his left arm was visible beneath his sleeve, a white strip of medical adhesive that stood out against the dark uniform like a flag. The gel pack on his shoulder was concealed by his collar, but anyone who looked carefully could see the stiffness in his posture, the slight favoring of his right side, the controlled breathing of a man who was managing significant pain as a background process, while focusing entirely on the room around him. 300 of the most powerful individuals in the Aetheran Dominion stared at him. He did not notice, or if he noticed, he did not care. His gray eyes were moving across the chamber in the same pattern I had seen 100 times before. Exits, choke points, head count. I activated the speaking crystal and began. I will not reproduce the entire speech here. It was long, detailed, and built on a foundation of economic analysis, military projections, and political precedent that I had spent 3 months constructing. The core argument was this. The Vathara Accord was not a trade agreement. It was a transfer of strategic dependence from the Dominion to the hegemony, designed to erode our military autonomy over a 10-year period by making us reliant on Keldrith-controlled supply chains for the gravitational ore that powered every ship in our fleet. Every clause, Every concession, every timeline, had been engineered to create a dependency that would eventually become leverage. And leverage, in the hands of a civilization that had just sent 12 assassins into our sovereign palace to silence a dissenting voice, was not a trading tool. It was a weapon. I presented the economic data in granular detail. I presented the military projections showing fleet readiness declining by 40% within 7 years, if the accord was implemented as written. I presented the intelligence assessments documenting Keldrith's strategic acquisitions in 3 other star systems where similar accords had been signed, all of which had resulted in de facto Keldrith control within a decade. The pattern was unmistakable. The precedent was damning. Then, I presented the evidence of the assassination attempt. I described the attack in clinical detail, stripping away emotion and letting the facts carry their own weight. 12 void-rank assassins, Keldrith military-grade signal null technology. Phase blades manufactured in hegemony facilities, with serial numbers traceable through their own supply chain records. Biotoxin compounds from government-controlled laboratories, with production logs that could not be falsified. I displayed the forensic analysis on the chamber's holographic projection system and let the council absorb the implications in silence. A foreign power had sent 12 of its most lethal operatives into the sovereign palace of the Etherean Dominion to end a member of the royal family for the offense of opposing a trade agreement. This was not diplomacy. This was not even espionage. This was an act of war, conducted with a smile and a handshake. The chamber was silent for a long time. Then I introduced Cole's testimony. He stepped forward to the speaking platform without ceremony, without hesitation, and without the visible nervousness that most beings display when addressing 300 of the most powerful people in a room. He walked with a slight limp he was doing his best to conceal, and the bandage on his arm caught the light from the twin suns streaming through the chamber's high windows. He spoke for 11 minutes. He described the attack sequence, the equipment used, the tactics employed, and the technical signatures that identified the signal null field generator as a Keldrith military model that had been decommissioned from active service 3 years earlier and was supposedly in secure storage at a hegemony naval facility. He explained how the assassins had entered through the service infrastructure, how they had disabled the sensor grid, how they had coordinated their approach in pairs. He provided timestamps, positions, weapon types, and ammunition counts with a precision that suggested he had been recording the engagement in real time rather than reconstructing it from memory. He spoke in simple, precise language. He did not embellish. He did not dramatize. He stated facts in the order they occurred, and let the facts speak for themselves. When a council member asked how he had survived an engagement against 12 void-rank operatives, Cole said, "Training and floor plan knowledge," and offered nothing further. The simplicity of the answer was more devastating than any elaboration could have been. Ambassador Draven objected 4 times during the testimony. Each objection was overruled by the council speaker. By the time Cole stepped back from the platform, Draven's bioluminescent patterns were cycling through colors I had never seen on a Keldrith before, a rapid, unstable shifting that suggested something beyond anger, something closer to the fundamental destabilization of a position he had believed was unassailable. The vote was called at midday, 247 in favor of rejecting the Vathara Accord, 53 against. The accord was dead. My political position within the Dominion was stronger than it had been in years, perhaps stronger than it had ever been. The assassination attempt, rather than silencing me, had transformed me from a vocal opposition voice into a symbol of resistance against Keldrith encroachment. My father, whatever his private feelings about my public defiance, could not argue with the result. I had won. But the victory was incomplete. Someone inside the palace had provided the assassins with access codes to the service infrastructure. Someone had arranged for the signal null field generator to be smuggled into the crystal spire and positioned on the 40th floor. The Keldrith could not have executed the attack without internal assistance, and identifying the traitor was now the most urgent security priority in the Dominion. Palace Intelligence launched a formal investigation with resources that dwarfed anything they had deployed in peacetime. They interviewed staff at every clearance level, reviewed access logs dating back 6 months, analyzed communication records across every channel and frequency used within the Palace network, and deployed counterintelligence protocols that had not been activated since the last interstellar conflict. After 4 days of exhaustive work, they had narrowed the suspect pool to approximately 60 individuals with the clearance and physical access necessary to facilitate the breach. Cole identified the traitor on the second day. He did not use the Palace intelligence apparatus. He did not access classified databases or intercept communications, or deploy any of the sophisticated analytical tools that our investigators relied upon. He used a method so fundamentally human, so rooted in the specific way his species processes information, that no Aetheran investigator would have thought to employ it. He had been watching people. Since his first day in the Crystal Spire, Cole had been doing more than counting heads and mapping corridors. He had been observing behavioral patterns, walking routes, greeting habits, meal schedules, posture changes, the micro-expressions that sentient beings produce when they are nervous, deceptive, or afraid. He had cataloged these patterns with the same quiet, relentless attention he applied to everything else, building a baseline understanding of normal behavior for every individual who regularly occupied space within my security perimeter. Not because he was instructed to, not because it was part of any protocol, because that is what humans do. They watch. They remember. They notice when something changes. 3 days before the attack, a senior chamberlain named Desic had changed his walking route. He had been using the same corridor between the administrative wing and the residential levels for 7 years, a straight path that took him past the main lift bank and through the central atrium. On the morning 3 days before the assassination attempt, he altered his path to include a detour through a service corridor on the 38th floor, a corridor that connected to the same ventilation infrastructure that the assassins later used to access the 40th floor. Cole had noticed. He had not reported it because, at the time, it was merely an anomaly, one data point among thousands, a single deviation in a pattern that could have had dozens of innocent explanations. People changed their routes for countless reasons, but after the attack, when the entry vector became clear, Cole cross-referenced Desic's route change with the ventilation access points and found a perfect match. The service corridor Desic had visited led directly to the junction where the assassins had entered the ventilation system. Then he provided the second piece of evidence. The passive Terran scanner he wore on his wrist, the same device that had detected the signal null field 4 seconds before the sensor grid went down, also monitored biometric stress indicators of nearby individuals. It did this automatically, as a background function, recording heart rate variations, cortisol signatures, and micro-muscle tension in the faces of everyone within a 5-meter radius. The device was standard issue for Terran close protection operatives, a tool designed for exactly this kind of behavioral surveillance. No one in the Aetheran security apparatus had known he was carrying it, because no one had thought to ask what a Tier 2 human guard might have strapped to his wrist beneath his sleeve. Cole had been wearing this device in Desic's presence on 11 separate occasions over the preceding month. On 9 of those occasions, Desic's biometric readings had been within normal parameters, consistent with the low-level stress of a senior Palace employee managing routine administrative duties. On 2 occasions, both within the 72 hours before the attack, his stress indicators had spiked to levels consistent with acute deception anxiety, the specific physiological signature of a person who is actively concealing something they know will have severe consequences if discovered. Cole presented this information to me privately, in the medical wing, on his second day of recovery. He laid it out simply: the route change, the ventilation junction, the biometric data, and then he waited for me to reach the conclusion on my own. I forwarded everything to Palace Intelligence. They arrested Desic within the hour. Under interrogation, the Chamberlain confirmed everything. He had been recruited by a Keldrith intelligence operative 18 months earlier and had been paid in gravitational ore futures, the very commodity the Vathara Accord was designed to control. He had provided access codes, ventilation schematics, and guard rotation schedules. He had propped open the service door at the banquet 3 weeks earlier to allow the installation of the listening device that Cole had flagged on his first night. The listening device. The kitchen corridor. Cole had spotted the vulnerability before the plot had even been fully assembled. He had asked Vorath to reposition guards. Vorath had refused. Vorath was dead now. and Desic was in a detention cell, and Cole Marin was sitting in the medical wing with a fractured arm, calmly reading floor schematics on a datapad, already preparing for the next threat, because humans do not stop, they do not celebrate. They do not rest until the job is done, and the job for Cole would never be done as long as I was alive, and someone somewhere wanted me not to be. I wept that night, alone in my quarters, not for Vorath, although I mourned him deeply, not for the guards who had given their lives, although their loss diminished me in ways I would feel for years. I wept because I had spent 6 weeks treating Cole Marin as an insult, a punishment, a political embarrassment, a piece of my father's petty revenge, and he had never once responded with anything other than quiet, absolute commitment to keeping me alive. I had given him contempt, and he had given me survival. I had given him dismissal, and he had given me his broken body as a shield between me and the darkness. 2 days after the council vote, my father summoned me to his private chambers. The sovereign of the Etherean Dominion was a tall, powerfully built male, whose bioluminescence ran in deep blues and purples, the colors of authority and controlled aggression. He had ruled for 37 years, and every one of those years was visible in the deliberate precision of his movements and the careful weight of his words. He sat behind a desk made of the same gravitational crystal as the council chamber, and regarded me with an expression that contained equal parts pride and wariness. The look of a father who has watched his daughter become something he did not anticipate, and is not entirely sure he can control. "The treaty rotation is ending," he said. "Your human's assignment will be complete in 14 days. He will be reassigned to the Terran Compact's next posting." I said nothing. I waited. "I have spoken with the Compact's military liaison. They are willing to assign a replacement if we request one, or we can fill the position with an Aetheran operative, someone appropriate for a Crown Princess's detail. A veteran, someone with the rank and capability to match the position." I looked at my father. He was offering me what I had wanted on the day Cole arrived. A proper guard, an Aetheran warrior, someone who looked the part and carried the right weapons and held the right rank. Someone who would make political sense, standing behind me at formal events, whose presence would project power rather than invite questions about why the third crown of the Etherean Dominion was being protected by a small mammal with a sidearm. "I want him to stay," I said. My father's bioluminescence flickered, a brief disruption in the deep blue that suggested surprise he had not expected to feel. "The human, Cole Marin, I am formally requesting that his assignment be extended indefinitely. He is a Tier 2 operative, Savara. His classification is 1 level above luggage escort. He defeated 12 void-rank assassins alone, with a fractured arm and 3 cracked ribs, and a sidearm with limited ammunition. If that is Tier 2, Father, then I do not want to meet Tier 1. My father was silent for a long moment. The twin suns had shifted while we spoke, and the light in his chambers had turned from gold to amber, casting long shadows across the crystal desk. Then he asked the question that mattered. Why? I could have given him tactical reasons. I could have cited Cole's observational capabilities, his behavioral analysis skills, his knowledge of my floor plan that exceeded anything our own security protocols required, his proven performance under extreme duress. All of these were true, and all of them would have been sufficient justification for any military or security decision. Instead, I told him the truth. Because he is the only guard I have ever had who was not guarding his own career. My father stared at me. The words hung between us in the amber light, and I watched them settle into his understanding. Every Etherean guard who had ever stood behind me had been, at some level, aware of the political implications of the assignment. Protecting a crown princess was a career milestone. Success meant promotion. Failure meant disgrace. Their loyalty was real, but it was layered over ambition, over calculation, over the constant awareness that their performance was being evaluated by people who controlled their future. Cole had none of that. Cole had no future in the Etherean political system. He had no rank to protect, no promotion to seek, no career to advance. He had stood in my outer chamber for 6 weeks, with nothing to gain and everything to lose, and he had done it with a completeness of purpose that made every other guard I had ever known look like they were performing a role rather than fulfilling one. Slowly, my father's bioluminescence shifted to a color I had rarely seen him produce. Warm amber. The color of reluctant respect. The color of a sovereign acknowledging that his daughter had found something he had not expected her to find. "I will make the request," he said. I found Cole in the barracks quarters that had been assigned to him on the ground floor of the Crystal Spire. The room was small, utilitarian, and contained almost nothing. A narrow bed that was slightly too short for even a human of his height. A storage locker with a combination lock. A desk with a data pad and a half-empty flask of water. His Terran compact kit bag, half-packed, sitting on the bed with the careful organization of someone who had learned to live out of a single bag and could be ready to move within minutes. He was folding a shirt when I entered. He stopped immediately and turned to face me, his posture shifting from relaxed to attentive, in a transition so smooth it looked involuntary. "Your Highness, I have spoken with the Sovereign. Your reassignment has been cancelled. You will remain in your current position." Cole paused. His hands were still holding the shirt, the fabric creased between his fingers. He did not smile. I was learning that humans do not always express gratitude through visible display. Sometimes they express it through stillness, through the quiet settling of tension they did not know they were carrying, through the absence of the restlessness that comes from uncertainty about what comes next. His shoulders dropped by perhaps a centimeter. His breathing changed, not faster or slower, but deeper. Something in his posture released. He nodded. "Then I will be in the outer chamber, Your Highness." He turned back to his kit bag and began unpacking, removing each folded item and placing it back in the storage locker with the same methodical precision he applied to everything else. I watched him for a moment. The room was quiet. The sounds of the palace, distant and muffled by the barracks walls, seemed to belong to another world entirely. In this small, plain room, with its narrow bed and its single data pad, the politics and the power and the gravitational crystal and the 9,000 years of Etherean civilization felt very far away. What remained was something simpler. Two people in a room, one of whom had chosen to stand between the other and everything that wanted to harm her, for no reason that ambition or obligation or protocol could explain. I said something I had never said to anyone outside my immediate family. Something that, in Etherean culture, carries a weight that cannot be translated into other languages, because it is not merely a word. It is an act of trust so profound that it restructures the relationship between two people permanently. When an Etherean gives their personal name to someone outside their bloodline, they are not sharing information. They are opening a door that cannot be closed again, creating a bond that exists outside the hierarchies of rank and politics and power. It is the most intimate thing my species can offer that does not involve the body. It is the offering of the self, unguarded and unadorned. "Savara," I said. Cole stopped unpacking. He turned to face me again. His gray eyes met mine, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw something in them that was not professional detachment or clinical assessment or the flat, mechanical readiness that I had come to associate with his presence. It was warmth. Quiet, contained, carefully managed warmth, the kind that humans carry deep inside themselves, beneath layers of discipline and duty, and the practiced composure they use to navigate a galaxy that is larger and more dangerous than their small, soft bodies were designed for. He let me see it, just for a moment, just long enough for me to understand what it meant. "Cole," he said, as if I did not already know, as if the exchange itself, the symmetry of it, the mutual offering of something personal and unguarded, was what mattered more than the names themselves. I held his gaze for a long moment. Then I turned and walked back toward the corridor, toward the council chambers and the political battles that awaited me, toward the future of a civilization that was only beginning to understand what it meant to have humans in the galaxy, not as allies, not as curiosities, not as the small, breakable, unremarkable species that everyone dismissed until it was too late, but as something else entirely, something that could not be classified, or ranked, or contained by any system the galaxy had yet devised. Behind me, I heard Cole close his locker, check his sidearm, and follow. 3 meters back, 1 meter to the right, watching the exits, watching the choke points, watching me. Always watching me, Not because he was ordered to, not because a treaty required it, because he had decided, in whatever quiet chamber of the human heart where such decisions are made, that I was worth standing behind. The galaxy has its empires, its fleets, its civilizations that bend gravity and shatter worlds. It has species that live for millennia, and species that can reshape matter with their thoughts. It has weapons that can crack planets, and shields that can hold back stars. And none of it, not one piece of it, is as dangerous as a single human being who has decided that someone behind him matters more than his own life. You do not see them coming. You do not understand them until it is too late. They are small and soft and breakable, and they will walk through fire for a person whose name they were given permission to speak. My name is Sevara Quillith, third crown of the Aetheran Dominion, and my guard's name is Cole.